Just after that big, nearly 200-car pileup almost a year ago now in the Galesburg stretch of I-94 that had a lot of people talking. And so there were some conclusions reached in this collaborative study, which involved, among others, the Michigan Department of Transportation and the Michigan State Police. And talking with us today, Captain Michael Brown of the Michigan State Police is on the line with us this morning. Captain, good morning.
Good morning to you.
And also with us today is Sheriff Matt Saxton here in Calhoun County. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard.
Well, thanks to the both of you for the time today. Let's, if we can set a scene about some of the conclusions of the report, Captain, why don't we start there?
Well, this study encompassed all the counties from the state line, Bering County, all the way through Jackson, to take a look at really what the data showed with high crash locations, both in the winter and through the summer months, just to see really what the data showed after the lawmakers requested the study for that big crash, to really identify some areas that were problems and see what MDOT could determine, and state police and law enforcement, of what we could do to make that corridor safer.
And what did they come up with?
Well, there was a number of areas that were determined to have higher crash locations than the average, both in the winter and in the non-winter months. And they spread around the corridor. There were several by Battle Creek, pretty much in that where all the main interchanges are, and then an area towards the western Calhoun in the winter months. But there was some extremely high crash rates. I guess extremely high would be the wrong word, but above normal in the winter in Van Buren County, down in Bering County, and then several areas in Kalamazoo County. So there was probably eight locations identified that had crash rates that were higher than the average, both in winter and non-winter areas.
Is that what you see, Sheriff? Does that concur with what your hunches were about our 94 stretch in Calhoun County?
Well, Richard, after you called yesterday, I had not read the report yet, so I did take some time to read over the report. The fact of the matter is, I-94 sits in a snow belt, so we are going to have the other two freeways that had higher wintertime incidents were I-196, which is along the lakeshore, and US 131, which sits in that same snow belt.
Well, and you get those breezes off the lake on those north-south routes, and holy mackerel. But even 94.
94, and as you went further east, like Jackson had the lower number of wintertime related crashes in that corridor study. But any other time throughout the year, the accident occurrence was at the same average of any other 70-mile-hour freeway in the state of Michigan.
So, Captain, is that the way you see this, too, that, yes, we're in a snow belt and there's some parts that are tough to traverse?
Well, that, as Sheriff Saxton said, the whole 94 corridor kind of falls in the middle of the range with traffic crashes throughout the year, but it does have a higher rate than all except two areas in the winter. And it really kind of, as you start getting towards the western part of Calhoun County, then it really increases, and that in the study you can see that the snowfall really increases as you go west into Kalamazoo, Van Buren, and Bering County with the lake effect snow. So there is a connection there for sure.
But there were some other conclusions, too, that came out in that report. One of them, which got publicized pretty readily, was the notion that we just drive too fast in these conditions. Is that the sense that the both of you have?
I would definitely agree with that. It's going to take everybody to help lower the crash rates in the state of Michigan. It's not just law enforcement. It's not just MDOT. It's not just the automakers. There's been great strides in safety over the years and the way freeways are built. cable barriers on the freeways have saved life. In the wintertime, there's probably more property damage incidents because of that, which typically would have been slide-offs.
Yeah.
But they're saving lives from crossover accidents and head-on accidents. But until we get the motoring public to recognize, this morning we had a handful of accidents on the overpasses,
Right,
because it iced over the night. If folks slow down, give themselves extra time to get to where they're going, everybody will be safer on the roadways.
Captain, how do you feel about that? I mean, as a driver myself, I sense that people always want to drive faster than I do. I don't think I'm a pokey driver, but it seems like the mindset is to go as fast as possible or faster. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if that's everyone's mindset. When you look at the crash data, especially in the winter accidents, across all law enforcement on the 94 corridor, close to 80% of all crashes in the winter, the drivers were coded or acknowledged as driving too fast for the conditions. So driver behavior is a big part of the winter crashes that occur.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been in police work long enough, the highways are dangerous, and you see individuals driving in excess of the road conditions and the visibility, and that's a big part of it is education, continued education to the motoring public. The Office of Highway Safety Planning has the Drive Slow on Ice and Snow campaign, which is going across the 94 corridor this year, that a variety of law enforcement agencies are working on. So we're trying to continue to spread that educational message too.
You know, it's interesting because if you look at some of the video from that crash in January of last year, and it's readily found on YouTube, you see a wall of snow, and then you emerge from that, or you see vehicles emerge from that, and there's a pileup in front of you. So what advice do you give us, both of you, who examine these things for a living, to handle situations like that?
Well, that situation back in January of this last year,
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like the perfect storm. I mean, the initial accident occurred. There were, I think, 50-some people cited for traveling too fast for conditions, which when you watch it, obviously they were traveling too fast for conditions. But interestingly enough, in this study, that area where the accident occurred did not have a high rate of accidents in the wintertime or any other time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess my point in asking that was, when you're emerging from a wall of snow and there's all kinds of debris in front of you, that is, stopped cars, you almost can't find an option. Is that fair to say, Captain?
Well, I don't know. When you look at that particular accident and many other multi-vehicle accidents that we've handled on the interstates, is you have a large portion of drivers that recognize the conditions and weren't able to stop or move off to the side of the road, and other people blindly drive through very low visibility. So you got a little bit of both there in that particular wreck and other ones that we've been involved in. So I guess the bottom line with the weather conditions in southwest Michigan or anywhere you may be driving is, visibility is key, and your speed has to match what your visibility is. For example, we had a John Deere tractor trailer with a video camera in there, and you probably saw some of that footage where he recognizes the conditions. He slows way down. He was able to stop very effectively, and then probably a half a dozen other commercial vehicles traveled past him at a higher rate of speed.
Yep.
And crashed into the wreck. So driver behavior is a lot of it, and what the visibility is in front of you and what your speed should be.
Sheriff, do we teach that well enough? I mean, I think some of us just don't encounter that perfect storm enough to be able to look ahead and say, okay, that's more than I can handle, and I need to, like that truck driver did, pull off and stop, or take this exit that's in front of me and deal with this later. Do we know how to recognize that?
Well, I don't think a majority of drivers do. Many of the accidents involved with this study occurred from leaving the driving portion of the lane and maybe overreacting or head-on crashes.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the general motoring public don't know how to correct after that, leaving the lane, maybe going off the shoulder of the road and
right.
overcorrecting, which causes quite a few accidents on the freeway.
Well, and they say practice makes perfect. A lot of us just haven't had the practice at this, myself
Right.
included. I would put myself in that category. We're talking about this I-94 report with the Michigan State Police and the Calhoun County Sheriff. Back in a moment on WBCK 820. Okay, we're here with Sheriff Matt Saxton, Calhoun County, and on the line with us is Captain Michael Brown of the Michigan State Police. We're talking about this I-94 study, and really we say I-94 study, but it involved, as the captain mentioned, a number of freeways in Michigan that were really focused upon after this big crash along I-94 almost a year ago. Now, Captain, some of the recommendations in that report involve things like moving the cable barrier, for example, in the hot zone where this crash took place, and just an overall notion that we probably ought to widen it to 3 lanes because the incident of accidents is less when we're talking about a 3-lane highway like that. What are your thoughts on some of those conclusions? Do you think they'd work?
Well, there are certain areas that those things would help, and I think MDOT has put a very good plan together of some existing projects and some enhancements across that corridor. For example, in 2016, they're going to do some resurfacing of some high crash locations by Battle Creek and in Kalamazoo with high friction surface treatments to help cars stay on the roadway during snowy and wet conditions. And then there's some environmental stations going into effect to help the forecasting of weather and deployment of snow plows and things like that. There is plans from MDOT to add a 3rd lane in the highest traffic location out a few years in 2020 from Lover's Lane to Sprinkle Road by Kalamazoo. And so there's a number of plans out there that will help some of these high crash locations. I'm not real clear on the area where they'd move the cable barrier. The cable barrier is doing the job that they're supposed to do.
Right.
And I think their plans were just to move that to give the motorist a little more room to pull off the side of the road or crash investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a number of things that are targeted to these areas that are a little more prone to higher crash areas as part of this study.
What do you think, Sheriff? Would you like to see 3 lanes through Calhoun County, too?
There's a lot of areas that would be good, but unless you're going to run it continuous from going from 3 to 2 and 2 to 3, I think may cause some more problems. But there's a couple things mentioned in the report. One of those being variable speed limits. If the ability was there to raise and lower the speed limit as weather predicts, that would have to be legislated.
Right.
It's not able to be done in our current speed laws currently in Michigan.
And that just means that in certain zones that might have been determined to be less safe at a higher speed, you drop the speed down to 65 or 55 or something like that.
Look at all the options.
Yeah.
If the weather conditions dictate a slower speed, right now they could only put up recommended speeds for slower times.
Mm-hmm. Does that work, Captain? I mean, when you're out there doing 70 or more, and the sign comes along and it says, take this curve at 55, do people do it?
Well, I think that the purpose of what they discussed with the variable speed limits was for these areas that are really prone to severe winter weather conditions, like areas of Van Buren County, where there'd be different signs near the roadway that would be flashing. You see some of those in foggy areas in the mountains and things like that that are warning signs to the motorist. But when the speed limit changes up and down, the motorists don't really react to that. So that was just something that was an option that was thrown out there because other states have variable speed limits in some of these high crash locations.
We were alluding off the air a moment ago that there is a study and thus some training going on to figure out ways to clear obstructions faster. Is that right?
Well, as we speak today, we're hosting a My Time training at our law enforcement center in Marshall, and it's training on for first responders, tow truck drivers, fire EMS to be able to clear the incident scene quickly on best ways for setting up hazard indicators during that scene while it's an active scene. There's been many laws put in place recently to do just that. The move over law for emergency vehicles,
right.
Slow down, move over. The law where if your vehicle is drivable and there's not a serious injury, to move your vehicle out of the roadway. Because many times, if you'll notice as you're driving down the freeway, there's a car parked on the side of the road. Just that single car sitting on the side of the road causes a traffic backup.
Sure, people...
And those traffic backups cause secondary accidents.
Right. So where does the Michigan State Police stand now, Captain, with this? Are you participating in any sort of follow-up now that these conclusions have been publicized?
Well, MDOT has their schedule of some work they're doing around these high crash corridors. On the state police side, we're concentrating on three things, and those things are educating the motoring public, and that includes the commercial vehicle drivers. Obviously, we have to take enforcement action on aggressive driving and people that cause the crashes on the highway, and our effective emergency response, because we're going to continue to have incidents out on the interstate, and working with our local partners and using the quick clearance principles. In my time, we have all our state police personnel trained with that, and there's a lot of locals and our partners in the wrecker business and fire departments are getting trained in that to do the best job we can on the highway. But we're focusing on those three things, the education and the enforcement, and making sure we have effective emergency response. And we're also working with our commercial vehicle enforcement division. We have an initiative coming up next week called Eyes on 94, which is an enforcement initiative with commercial vehicle drivers. We have about 10 to 15,000 commercial vehicles travel that corridor every day.
I'll bet.
And that's a lot of traffic. Depends on what area you're in. We have that amount of commercial vehicle traffic every day on that highway. So that's a big part of being safe on the highway, is the education of the commercial vehicle fleet that's out there.
All right. Well, let's stay in touch on these issues. Feel free to reach out if you have developments so that you'd like to publicize on this or other issues. Captain Michael Brown, Michigan State Police, Sheriff Matt Saxton, Calhoun County. Thanks to the both of you.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. Thanks, Richard.
8:30.